Cool. Okay, I'm just going to wait an obligatory couple of seconds to make sure that we are actually recording properly. And oh, I've already started recording now, so if I mispronounce your surname, I'm so sorry, Jay. I just read it.
Oh,
So, okay, so Dark Bleatings, everyone. I'm here with another author interview today, and I am absolutely thrilled and ecstatic to have Jay Bonansinga. Have I said that correctly?
beautifully. Wow.
Yes.
I didn't even like give you an orientation on the name, and you
Oh,
got it.
good. Um, Thank you so much for being here, Jay. Just quickly for anyone
Pleasure.
who might not have picked up your books, I first became familiar with you through my Walking Dead obsession, and you have a selection of novels co-written with Robert Kirkman, and then work that you did on your own for The Walking Dead. And I have some of your other work here as well, but that was the starting point for anyone unfamiliar. But you should be familiar, and I'm going to familiarize you now with Jay. Um, yes. How is everything going?
Good, good. I mean, it's so good to hear you mention those and hold them up, and it's just they're my babies. But also, like when you're an author and you mention it to people, you're at the Jiffy Lube getting your car, serviced, or you're at the grocery store, and it's say, "Oh, I heard you were an author." Yes, yeah. And what have you written? What would I know? Well, and I'm like, well, I'm known probably mostly for The Walking Dead. I've written a lot of books over almost 3 decades. But and he would say, The Walking Dead, the TV show? And I'm like, yeah, yeah, I worked for that company and I wrote backstories um, for that company that kind of really gave some TLC and insight into where the characters, where the most popular characters came from and how they got there and their childhoods and their family and invariably they would go, well, I have to say I don't really do zombies. I have never watched the show. I'm not really into zombies, but my kids would be really impressed.
Yeah. Um, it's such a that it's such an amazing um franchise to contribute to, and at the time that I discovered your books, I love zombies. Zombies are my favorite horror subgenre. Well, apocalyptic, but specifically zombies.
Oh,
And
we're gonna get along really well.
um, and I just found your books because basically I was collecting anything and everything that was Walking Dead related. Like, and this is just when the first. Oh, I'm so sorry, my cat has arrived. Over.
Oh, I have one too, but I locked her out of the room.
Uh, if I lock him out, he'll just disturb us by scratching the door from
Right.
time to time. So I just let him come in. Um, yeah, so I was collecting everything that I could to do with The Walking Dead, and it was only in its first few seasons, maybe up to season four-ish at the time. And I was like, oh, I wonder if there are tie-in novels or novelizations. And then I found these books, and notably, they cover the like sort of the origin story of the governor, which was my
Yeah.
favorite character. And
Wow, that's great.
I thought you did such a wonderful job of giving us the governor that we know, but like very slowly. You made him a very like empathetic character. I was really on
Thank
board with him, and I had to keep reminding myself, oh wait, I know where his story goes though.
Right. Yeah, I mean I've never been taught this. I just sort of picked it up intuitively, but um in a novel, even in movies, in any narrative, art form, but especially in a novel, like a character becomes who they have relationships with. A character becomes their relationship, their friend, their lover, that makes them human. Um, lone wolves don't make good characters because they're just out there on their own and they're in a vacuum and you don't really, they're more mysterious. Um, even like Hannibal Lecter. he became a fascinating character because he admired Clarice Starling and he became
Mhm.
close to her, and so that made him even scarier because he was human. It
Mhm.
humanized him in a really strange way. And I found the Philip character, who was the governor, um, that he became who he had relationships with, that defined him and made him human, even though he was a bad MFer. And
Mhm.
but one day I'm at one of the conventions in San Francisco, and my wife, who always hangs out with me, and she's my manager and everything, she comes up to the table and goes, "David Morrissey wants to see you." And I had never met him. I didn't know he was there. I did, she's like, "Yeah, he's at table 17. Go ahead. I'll watch over the table." And I'm like, "Really?" And I went down and he's just like, "Hey, mate, how you doing?" He's hugging me and kissing me, and he's just a sweet, wonderful person. He's a rock and roll DJ. He's like a super cool guy. But what he said changed my life a little bit, on one level. He said, he goes, "Yeah, people ask me, did you read the comic book before you started your work as the governor?" And and he said, "No, not really. I read one document, and that is Jay and Robert's book, The Rise of the Governor." And he said, "That's what I base my portrayal on." And the more I thought about it, well, at first I was dumbstruck. I was gobsmacked, you know. Uh, but then I started thinking, yeah, he did absorb that, especially the duality issue, which
Yeah.
I won't spoil anything, but there's a big twist at the end of that book that he reveals who he really is, and it's crazy. And in that, all that stuff he brought into his performance. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was an amazing experience, and I'm proud. Mostly, that's one of the books I'm most proud of. Probably that is up there in, one or two books that I'm most proud of. I've written 35, but that's and I didn't say that I didn't say that to amaze or um brag. I
Mhm.
mean, they could be 35 really crappy books that I just knocked off.
No, no, no. We'll move on to some others, but no, I think I really enjoyed all of the Philip books. But the yeah, the I'm just looking at the titles now. Yeah, the I think that the Fall of the Governor one and two, part one and two, were my favorites.
Yeah.
And I
Those
actually did,
those followed the story of
yeah.
the show almost. Those had the most characters that people recognized in those two books. And it was only supposed to be one book.
Mhm.
But I was, I started to work on The Fall of the Governor. The whole idea, I only had a contract for 3 books at the beginning.
Mhm.
And, it was going to be The Rise of the Governor, The Road to Woodbury,
Mhm.
where you meet his nemesis, and then The Fall of the Governor.
Mhm.
But so I'm working on The Fall of the Governor, and Robert keeps, contacting me going, "Oh, I forgot one thing I want you to put in the book. There's this, this." I'm like, "Okay, all right, yeah." I'm like taking an order for Grubhub, like to deliver food for him, and he's like, "Oh, and did I say French fries? Yeah, I want French fries." He wanted so much in that book, so finally, I was literally it was the 4th of July in America, which is like a great vacation holiday because it's a 3-day weekend. It's in the middle of the summer. And I was on a beach, and I was like whining to my wife and friend, and it might have been my wife that said it, or I might have just come up with it, but I was like, I wonder if they would publish 2 books,
Mhm.
part one and part two. And I wasn't thinking like, and it's going to be more money for me.
Mhm.
That was the farthest thing from my mind. I just wanted to please Robert,
Yeah.
uh, and I made a call that day. Everybody was on vacation, but they all answered their cell phones. And the editor at Thomas Dunn Books was like, "That's a great idea." And And I got a hold of Robert, and he goes, "You know what? I was thinking about that. I was kind of thinking about that." And I was like, "Yeah, you're a comic book guy. That's classic comic book.
Mhm.
To be continued, a big splash page at the la on the last page." And you know, so that's how that came about being two books. Um, yeah, it was magic. It was
It's
magic.
it's I think that one of my favorite things, this is one of been always been one of my favorite things about just The Walking Dead in general, because I also have all of the comics. I watched all of the
Which are
shows.
great, by the way. If
Oh,
if
they
anybody's listening in who's
fantastic.
never looked at the comics, they're among the greatest comics I've ever read.
Yeah, they're amazing, and I think that the whole universe of The Walking Dead though is so special because it's so collaborative, and so I felt like the first few seasons, especially when
Yeah.
Frank Darabont adapted it, I thought
Right.
that the way he adapted Robert's work was um wonderful, because they were sometimes he'd throw in a scene that you'd recognize from the comic, but then he'd sort of take it in a different direction, and then
Yeah.
he'd
Right.
do the horrible thing to somebody else that you weren't
Right.
like, so he like kept it was I thought it served the comic fans really well, and people who were just unique to the show. And then these books that you wrote were just such I don't even want to say background. I feel like they're essential governor
Oh,
reading,
thank
and
you. Thank
uh,
you.
it they provided, and I did wonder if he'd read any of these and based his character, his portrayal on them, because he's got David Morrissey had this like I would never want to cross paths with this guy, but he did have a sensitivity to him where you
Yeah.
could tell
Right.
that he'd been really traumatized
Right.
and hurt by the apocalypse, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Definitely.
and the loss of people in his life, and obviously that's why he's very weird about his
Right.
attachments with everyone else. Um, but I thought he just played it really well. And when I was reading these books, I was picturing him, and I could in your writing, I could see how he might get there. But I, even though I knew where it was going to go for him, I was like, oh, because he's so easy to root for in the first
Right.
couple of books, because you just want him to find his feet and
Right.
be
Right.
okay. And I felt so conflicted knowing what I already knew.
That's
Um,
awesome.
but yeah, they were just a great time. At what point, in like just The Walking Dead in general, did you get involved, and when did you know that you were going to be writing these books?
Good question, because it was fascinating how I was uploaded into that world. My it happened. It started like a lot of stories start in the show business um, realm. One agent had lunch with another agent, and DA, it was Robert's manager and co-producer of the show, David Alpert. He was having lunch with my agent and manager in Los Angeles. His name is Andy Cohen. God bless both
Mhm.
of them. And DA knew that Robert had mentioned to him, I really want to explore The Walking Dead in a number of different mediums, including novels. So
Mhm.
see if you can find a horror novelist that has the chops to do it. And Andy, my agent, said, I represent a horror novelist. His name is Jay Bonansinga. He's Stoker finalist. He's written several horror novels. Um, and DA's like, cool, okay, well, let's get his writing samples and everything. And to make a long story short, there were other authors far better than I vying for it. But at the beginning of my career, years earlier, in the mid 90s, I worked with George Romero.
Oh,
And it turns out that, Robert really got the idea for The Walking Dead watching a George Romero movie. Um, that came from Robert's own lips. I know that's the case.
mhm.
He said, I was watching like one of George's movies. I think it was Day of the Dead. And at the end, like a lot of George Romero's movies, um, who's also a sweetheart. All these people that dabble in like the dark
Mhm.
arts are the nicest people. They're the friendliest. Um, and so George made this movie called Day of the Dead, where at the end, this sort of rainbow coalition of characters. There's like a pregnant woman, there's
Hmm.
like a gay man, there's an African American, there's you know an alcoholic. This is all these, and they all band together and they find a helicopter and they escape and they find an island, and at the end of Day of the Dead, they're fishing and they're happy, and the woman's about ready to deliver. So you have this sense that
Hmm.
society's going to start over again. But Robert Robert's like watching it, going, and then what?
Yeah.
You know, what happens then? They're on an island. You have a pregnant woman. It seems like the story's just beginning. It's just what I call an and then.
Hmm.
Uh, and then so then he told me once, so I decided I wanted to write, a George Romero movie that never ended.
Hmm.
It never ended. It just kept going. It was, this epic reshuffling of society over and over. And yeah, that's what he did. It was really, and so I think that's how I got the job, is I knew George. George was a friend of mine and we had worked together.
Oh,
And
and I yeah, I remember reading that Robert said that because, as well as obsessively collecting all of the fiction, I also subscribed to the Walking Dead magazine and I got every
yeah,
issue,
great
including
magazine.
I'd buy sometimes they'd release like an alternative cover version. I got all of them as well. So I read everything that Robert said in about a 10-year period, I think, about the zombies in the show. And yeah, George Romero is a hero of mine. I grew up watching his films, and I
Me
was
too.
this close to interviewing him years ago. I used to write for
Oh,
a different website, and he was coming here on a press tour, and they had, I think his agent or someone had confirmed it, but unfortunately we lost him, and I was obviously really sad to hear that he'd passed, but I think I must have watched every single interview with him that I could find, and yeah, being sort of the grandfather of the zombie genre
right.
as we know them is
Yeah.
an unbelievable achievement in horror.
Yeah, absolutely. People always ask me, how do you feel about fast-moving zombies? And Robert felt the same way that I'm about to say. We almost like had identical answers at different times, but they're cool and they're scary, fast-moving zombies, but they're not zombies. They're
Yeah,
not zombies. They're
they're
like
infected or yeah.
creatures,
Mhm.
monsters. And there's so many reasons why the zombies should be slow moving and shamble and shuffle, and be kind of dumb, and
Mhm.
you know um and that's George's invention. George invented that. It's literally a trademarked invention of George Romero. He invented that zombie.
Mhm.
And basically you could just, if you have pretty decent cardio, you could outrun them. you
Yeah.
know
Or
but that's the
if
point.
or if you just have someone that's slower than you, you just have to outrun the slowest
Right.
person.
As
You're
bait.
okay. Or, you can take a Shane type of approach. But that's from the show, but that's a little bit harsh.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
that's such a cool story about how you came to work with Robert and work in this franchise. Did you get to were you a fan of the show as well?
I started before the show was produced.
Oh, sorry, I meant like afterwards. Like, did you start watching it and
Okay. I thought it's funny because my brain is so oriented toward, I got involved with it really not knowing. I don't think anybody knew, but I especially, I just thought it was going to be, a fun job in and out.
Mhm.
How good could a show about a zombie apocalypse be? I mean,
Mhm.
how good could it be? I
Really
admit,
good.
yeah, yeah, I admit, as I learned more and more about it, I thought, oh man, I have stumbled into something amazing. and it was true that when the I was midway through the book when the first episode uh was broadcast, and I just couldn't believe how good it was. And I adored it. I kept trying to convince people. I'm not just saying that because I'm
Mhm.
involved in it. I'm a fan of this TV show. I don't have anything to do with the TV show. Once in a while, my wife Jill's, she's super cool, but she's not like a horror fan, but
Mhm.
she adored it too. It had such a wide audience. Even her mother, my mother-in-law, is like, Jay, we're really proud of you, but I'm not going to be watching it. I don't do zombies.
Mhm.
Like everybody over the age of 60 says.
Yeah.
But Jill's like, Mom, just check out this TV show, just watch the first season. It's only like 5 episodes or something, or 6 episodes. Just watch the first season. Flash forward like 3 or 4 months later, and she started a book club in a retirement community among women reading the books. You
Oh,
know, she
that's so cool.
she's so excited about it and everything. I even named a couple characters about her and her husband. I named them with the same names and everything, and she's always asking me, how are the Sterns? Did they die? Did you have the Sterns die and get eaten? I hope not. Are they out there? Are they okay? You know, but I kept learning, like Frank Darabont's the showrunner,
Unreal.
Gale Ann Hurd,
I, I don't.
Terminator, you know, Point Blank. I mean, she's a legend, and she
Yeah,
was
she worked
involved
on
in
Alien, you right?
Aliens. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. I mean, I kept learning these things before the show came out, and then it lived up to it surpassed
Yeah.
my expectations. It was so good. And I have to admit, I was on board for like 7 years. Um, but the show went on. The show
Mm.
kept going,
Still
kept
going.
still going. Yeah, exactly. There's so many spin-offs and stuff. But I think, you know, my theory is, um, and I probably shouldn't say this, Robert would fire me if I still worked for him, probably. But my theory is that because Robert didn't really have an ending,
Mm.
he didn't have an ending to it. He was a genius when it came to storytelling, though. Like in his comic book,
Yeah.
he would have a splash page, a big, huge page, lurking at the end of an issue. And just when you were sort of getting tired of one aspect, you turn the page, and the last page on that issue of the comic book, the zombies are whispering to each other.
Mm.
And you're like, what?
Oh,
And
yeah.
then you can't wait for the next episode. That's the mind of a comic book genius.
Yeah.
And but he eventually just, it sort of became more of a business
Mm.
than a work of art. It was a work of art, and they got so popular. This is my theory. Nobody,
Mhm.
I can't, it's not based on any science, but because they didn't have an ending, I
Mm.
think it just started to sort of meander. And by
Mm.
that time, Robert wasn't, I think Robert left I don't think he was even involved, directly. I'm not sure I'd fulfilled my last contract with him, and I had moved on.
Mhm.
Um, Ironically, I moved on to work with Stan Lee.
That's amazing.
Yeah, isn't that weird? It's not, I don't plan this stuff. I don't think anybody in the arts goes, here's when they get out of college, okay, here's my career. I'm going to
Mhm.
start here. I'm going to work with George Romero. I'm going to be known for zombies. Then I'll get a job with this show that's going to be a huge. No, nobody ever plans. You just
Yeah.
in the arts, you just follow your muse. You just do what is interesting to you, and you try to sell it, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Well, I would say I just want to go back to something you said earlier where you said you like stumbled into this thing that became huge. Like I would say you didn't stumble into it. You were part of creating this universe. And for book fans, so books are my first love, and then books and comic books, and then TV and film and everything. And so for me, these novels were as much a part of the entire thing as everything else was. And
Thank you. That's really sweet. I really appreciate that.
they're
Thank
one
you.
of my favorite parts as well because they're so immersive and because you just because I think that everyone that watched the show wanted a bit more time with the governor because he was
Yeah.
fascinating. And so it was so great to get to sit with him for a while. And yeah, I think
Yeah,
that
they made it a New York Times bestseller. I'd never had a New York Times bestseller. I never made the
mhm,
list until that moment. And Brendan Deneen, who was our editor, emailed Robert and I, and it was a very short email, but I kept it and I framed it. It just
mhm.
said, "Gentlemen, from this day forward, you each shall be known as New York Times bestselling authors."
That's amazing.
It's so cool. But I remember vividly going, the fans made this happen.
Mhm,
Because Robert was always like, what do the fans want? He's so into,
mhm.
he really responds more than any major artist in the field that I've ever known. He's so interested in what the fans want. Maybe because he started as a fan, you know.
Yeah, yeah. There was
Yeah,
I could feel the George Romero fandom in the franchise because where you've got people
yeah,
like Greg Nicotero working,
yeah,
um
right.
that's another one
Came
that
from
I've
the
been
George Romero school of school of
yeah, and
writing.
Greg is someone whose career I have been interested in since I was a teenager because I looked him up and I do think that he does the best special effects, practical
Yeah.
effects in the
Oh,
world for
he's the
zombies.
go-to person in
Yeah,
Hollywood. Yeah.
yeah, I met him at that Walker Stalker convention actually, and I tended to embarrass myself at those things. I went with my brother, and I did used to work in entertainment, but it was like family park kind of stuff, so not like this kind of level.
Right.
And I remember saying to my brother, right, we're going to meet a load of people. They're just people. Don't freak out. And then the first person I met was Norman Reedus, and I lost my mind and embarrassed. By the time I got to you, I think I'd exhausted myself of like embarrassing myself in front of people. But I did find you were very calming to talk to, as was Greg. And I will say though, I do think that as actors go, the cast of The Walking Dead are wonderful people. What
Yeah.
a nice group of people to meet.
Right.
But everyone
And
involved,
what is it? What I have a question for you.
yes.
What is it about British actors? They're so good at playing Southern American hillbillies.
Do you know what I think it is?
What's that? Why?
I think it's because we grow up on American TV here. So I think with accents or sort of like adopting certain regions and
Yeah.
stuff, I think that we're just so used to seeing it, or like a stereotyped version of it, maybe.
Right.
Um,
Right.
I remember watching an interview with Andrew Lincoln where they were asking him what he thought of, like Americans coming over here and taking British acting jobs, and he was on The Walking Dead at the time, and he was like, "Oh yeah, it's terrible. Oh, stay in your own country." Yeah. Um, but yeah, he has a
Yeah.
good sense of humor about the
Yeah. Right.
Carl and all of that stuff. Yeah, I was gonna say about Greg, when I spoke to him, he was very kind to me and I just gushed a lot about because he was writing episodes and directing at that time as well. So I kind of exploded about my fandom in general on him and I said, it would be a dream of mine to like get to work on something with you at some point. And he was like, well, it was my dream to work with Galen Hurd. So just
Wow.
he was like at the next
Awesome.
convention, and I was like, oh, maybe I could, write a little like on spec
Right.
webisode or something. And he was like, yeah, yeah, bring it next time. And then the convention never happened again here. And I'm sure I tell everyone that that is the only reason why I wasn't put on the writing staff. It's the only reason. But I find, and yourself as well, like you gave me some really nice, encouraging writing advice, and I do find that writers and people who are like constructing these stories are always so nice to speak to and encouraging and
That's good.
you gave me such a boost. I had my first short story collection published shortly after
Oh,
I met
congratulations.
you. It's sadly out of print now because the press went under, but it was there was a little zombie nod in there that was kind of an homage to your work and George and everybody.
Aw, oh,
Um,
cool.
yes, I don't want to like just gush too much and embarrass you, but you are a huge inspiration to me, and I
Aw,
love your work. And with
thank
that
you.
said, I have to talk to you about this novel that I bought from you at the convention, Self-Storage. And I've been talking about this to everybody because I reread it recently, and it's fantastic. And it's completely different, obviously, to your Walking Dead work, because this is a universe entirely conceived of by you, and everything in it comes directly from you. And I have to ask you what the starting point of this story was in your head, because it's more complex than it first seems. And I read it in one sitting, by the way. I couldn't put it
Wow,
down. So,
that's awesome. That's the ultimate compliment. Um, yeah, I mean, well, so yeah, I teach horror at DePaul University in Chicago.
mhm.
In fact, I'm teaching it right now. This spring quarter is the quarter that I teach horror. Maybe they're just like, spring is sprung. Let's go dark and talk about people being beheaded and you know. Um, but I love teaching it. And one of the things I try to urge students to do is have subtext
Mhm,
in horror. And also I loved Stephen King and Clive Barker and the people that I grew up
mhm,
reading and that made me want to be a horror writer. And they are really good at subtext. And so I tell my students, really strive to write a horror story that's scary and riveting, but it has a deeper meaning. There's a
mhm,
subtext in there. And I r wanted to write a piece about addiction. In fact, I, like, it's pretty well known that Stephen King wrote The Shining to work out some personal feelings about his addictions.
mhm,
And, so I, and this is how my ideas come to me. You just have to, you have to go to your, this crazy, stupid little self-storage locker to pick up something, a tax return or, old book that you're searching for and everything. And the minute I walked into it and I heard like weird creaking noises around the creepy place that it's in, I just started thinking, there's a story here. And
mm,
then I started looking around at what was in my storage locker, and I'm like, these are kind of my lost dreams, my unrequited desires. They're all in here,
mhm,
and then I'm like, that could be part of this story. And so I just started thinking, if a person was locked in there, they'd be locked in the back of their own mind, their
mm,
own memory, their own, lost dreams and stuff. And that's when it started to come together. A guy who was, like a high functioning heroin addict, and he microdosed
mhm,
and good at it, and he could do his job. He was an artist and he could do his job, and he was kind of like a hustler, and but he deep down he, was um sad and lonely, and he was divorced and he had a little son.
mm,
It just started coming together. That's a lot of times that's where I get my ideas, or I just
mm,
like often I go somewhere, and I'm like,
mm,
oh man, there's a story here. I just recently went to Sicily and Italy, and I'm in Sicily, and I totally got an idea for a novel. Well, I was just being around Sicilians and being in Sicily, and it was so beautiful. And I'm Sicilian. My
mm,
father's side of the family are Sicilians, so I just started loving it, and then I just started I came up with this idea. So that's where self-storage came from. Is I just thought, how sad that we keep all our shit that we don't need, and maybe
mm,
some of it is sort of lost dreams, and I just I think about that every time I pass one on the road. I'm like, there's another series of vaults of things that,
Yeah,
never happened. You
it's
know.
I thought, because even without like the premise of this father and son, so they get accidentally locked into this storage unit, and
Right,
it's the Christmas holidays, so no one is likely to turn
right.
up in a reasonable time frame. And that on its own is, I've seen other people who've reviewed it compare it to Misery in that you're trapped in a room kind of scenario, and I love those stories, and I thought that that on its own just works as a great horror
Thank you.
story, but then you
Thank
had all these extra elements. And one of my favorite things about it was that you were realistic in how you depicted the drug addiction, but you were really respectful as well, because I more often than not, I can always tell if a writer has never had an addiction or they've never researched it or known anyone.
Wow.
And
Interesting.
I really connected to it because um, this isn't like a dark story or anything, but I was in a car accident and I spent a couple of weeks in hospital on a morphine drip. And so when I came out, I went through opiate withdrawal. And
Yeah.
the one of the worst things about that because it is a process, um, like a physical process, and I
Yeah.
was so judged by people around me that didn't know the ins and outs of what had happened. And um I just thought, well, there's a lot of reasons why people end up struggling with addiction, and you never know. And even if it was a case of someone just did something recreationally one day and it got out of hand, that doesn't mean that they're bad people. um and addiction is very, like, I found it, it was the medical necessity that I had this issue, and I
Yeah.
found it really difficult, and it gave me a renewed sympathy for everybody that struggles with any addiction, because it is
Right,
it's
right.
really difficult. And I found myself being really annoyed with
Did
him.
they get, if
Yeah.
you don't mind, it's none of my business, but you don't have to answer this, but did they give you methadone? Like, did they
Oh
give you
no,
medication
no.
to come
They
down off it?
they gave me tramadol,
Yeah, that's
sent me home with it, but I'd
mhm.
never been addicted to anything before, so I just, it didn't even occur to me that this was going to be a part of my recovery process. They
Right,
just said,
right.
oh, you might struggle a little bit coming off these tablets, and I thought they meant because I'd be feeling more pain from my surgeries and stuff.
Right.
um, and then I had a bit of a rude awakening, but no, they didn't warn me about tapering or any. I had no information given to me or anything, so I kind
Right.
of white knuckled it with Google
Wow.
basically. But it was really savage, and so I feel really sorry for people, because I understand how people can,
Right.
come off a drug and then they end up back on it a few years later for, like,
Yeah.
I suffer
Right.
migraines, and migraine medication tends to have codeine in it, so I have to
Right.
consider things like that now, just to
Yeah.
be careful. But um
Right.
so yeah,
I
your
can see
main.
why you connected with that book too, you know.
Yeah, because I felt sort of simultaneously irritated with him that he had used before he went to pick his son up, but also I understand that it's not a wholly conscious decision, because your body starts, it's a chemical situation that you got going on in
Really
your
well
brain.
said. Well said.
And
Yeah.
um and he very much was a loving father that
Yeah.
really loved it. He wasn't a neglectful parent, and I
Right.
really liked, I very so rarely see characters depicted with addictions that are managing normal day-to-day life, and it is an issue, but it doesn't make them a bad parent or a bad
Right.
person.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
really felt for him. And I don't want to spoil anything about the book, but as you get into the more sort of like horror elements as you go further in, I really didn't know uh what the crux of the thing was going to be, because his son is suffering with something's going on, and his son is sort of like exploring it. And I
Yeah.
just thought that it was going to be um like some like horrible I thought it was going to be like a Jack from The Shining thing, like when he broke Danny's arm. I thought it was going to be something like that, and then it turned out to just be something you would never want your kid to see.
Right.
But that it wasn't
Right.
necessarily um like the stuff of all bad parents or anything. And
Yeah, that's really well said. Yeah. Yeah, you got me.
I thought, um, I just thought that was such a unique way to go with that story because you could have easily leaned into something that was a bit more stereotypical and it would have worked.
Right.
But that it was an extra dimension that's just I just found it really thought-provoking because I was there thinking about then like, oh my God, what kind of stuff have I seen that's lodged itself in my subconscious? And it wasn't necessarily anything, it was just something I couldn't comprehend at the time,
Yeah.
you know?
Right. Right.
Um,
Yeah, I think, this is a it's very personal, book. And also, but also, like, I'm not sure all people are like this. You can't stereotype anything really, but I just remember images throughout my
mhm,
life, but especially as a kid. And that's where Rotten Face came from. If you see someone you love and adore, and they're your guardian and your God, like your father or your mother,
mhm.
see them enraged. It's one of the scariest things that a child can see for some
Yeah,
reason. Or at least it was for me.
yeah.
you know and my dad was a sweetheart. That's why when I saw him enraged one time, it's an image that will live with me the rest of my life.
Hmm.
So, and that's another thing that I imbued the idea with, is this Rotten Face was a monster. The monster was his father, you know,
Hmm.
and his father wasn't abusive, but there was this
Yeah.
one moment when he went over the line,
Hmm.
and that will always stay with that kid, always. I had one. We're developing it as a film, and I had one actor, and I won't mention his name, because there's no reason to, but I had one actor signed up, and I said, I'm going to show you a film of an actual, junkie going through withdrawal. It's pretty rough, but I'm going to direct this movie, and I'm going to go for that. I'm going to go for realism and
Hmm.
really, have you watch these films and watch people. And I showed it to him, and he's like, about a week later, he called me and he's like, "Man, I'm so sorry, but I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not there yet in my acting. I want to, but I know I can't do that." So then, um, The Walking Dead happened, and I got Lou Temple. Lou Temple played, one of the prisoners in the prison
Hmm.
in the early seasons,
Yeah,
and
I know who he is.
yeah, I fell in love with him, and then I became a good friend of his, and then I gave him the book, and I'm like, read this. I just wonder if you'd
Mhm.
be have any interest in this. And he loved it. He loved it. And I'm like, oh my God, you're so perfect for this father, And so yeah, Lou's gonna play the father.
That's so oh God, yeah, I really I loved the character so much because I I could feel nothing but sympathy for him.
Yeah,
Because the scenario is so it's so grim, just like you it would be bad enough if he was on his own, but it's so much worse because he's taking care of his son and
right,
he
right,
has no answers for his kid. He doesn't want to lie to him and be like, everything's fine. And
right,
the kid
right,
already knows everything isn't fine. And
right.
there was a line in there which I can't remember the exact wording, but you did write something about that like it's best not to lie to your kids in bad circumstances. And I thought that's so true because kids know when something is wrong. And when the caregiver lies to them in that moment, then they don't trust the caregiver anymore because
Right. Right.
they know that that's wrong and that what they're being told isn't right. And I thought that was such a it was just such a good detail to work in about how conflicted he was about how to handle the situation and the fact that he's going to start going into withdrawal in a matter of hours and remembering what that was like for me with my home comforts and a support network and my Walking Dead and I was playing uh I was playing zombies on Call of Duty as well a lot to like get myself through like the rougher hours, but it's a really rough experience, um mentally and physically. It's I think
Yeah.
people don't realize how physical withdrawal can be. And
Yeah.
I just thought that on its own is a nightmare, being stuck in the dark as well, with no water, no good snacks.
Right.
Um, and then you're trying not to let your kids see any of that on top of trying to figure out um how to not die in there. And
Right.
I just thought you nailed every element of the horror because there were so many different aspects. You could have just stuck with one thing, but you worked so many just little angles of horror in. Um, do you plot, or do you kind of know where you're going and then, you know, uh edit or redraft afterwards?
That's a good question. I totally believe that you need to know what the
Hmm.
ending is before you start, for many reasons. But the most important reason is if you know what the ending is, it's a destination. You know where you're going. You know what the ending is. Then you know where it begins.
Hmm.
Because it does affect the beginning. The ending and the beginning are really very closely related. They're very elliptical. If it's good, I believe. That's just my own thing that, everybody has a different process and everybody all, I tell my students, it's like, David Mamet once said, the only thing you can learn in the arts, if you're going to school and studying any corner of the arts, the only thing you really are going to learn is how to please your professor.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
there's some truth to that, you know what I mean? Like, but I try to, make sure my students know, I'm just one guy that does this for a living and bringing in my experiences, in the trenches and really making stuff. And so I'm
Hmm.
just putting it into the classroom, but there's no rules. They're just guidelines. There's no rules. But I really try to urge them to have the skeleton of the story, the beginning, middle, and end.
Hmm.
And then, like you said, then you're free to improvise and have it tell you what it wants to be. Your story will tell you after a while what it wants to be,
Hmm.
And it happened with the governor. The governor, because see, I knew the comic book. I studied the comic book before I even started working on any of the Walking Dead books.
Hmm.
And I'm like, this guy, the governor, before I really knew what Robert wanted to do with him,
Hmm.
um, this guy, he's just pure evil. There's nothing redeeming about this guy. I'm supposed to put like flesh on the bones of this guy. He's just he would he says to in the comic book he says to you know Rick, let me take you on a little tour. And I'm like, no one would go on a tour with this guy.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you're gonna, oh, okay. Yeah, thank you. Um, yeah, and I'm like, but then Robert gave me this like it wasn't really elaborate or comprehensive. It was just sort of the beginning, middle, and end.
Mhm.
But then I realized, oh, this guy is a real guy. He has a brother and he has an ex-wife and he has a little girl.
Yeah.
And so then I'm like, okay. Okay. And he did have a little girl in the comic book, and it was that master stroke of having him not be able to put her out of her misery. He had to hold on to her and keep her
Mhm.
chained, to the wall in his, lonely apartment in the comic book, And that
Mhm.
started to humanize this guy even in the comic book.
Yeah.
Was further humanized in my book because I was just like he has to be somewhat, if not sympathetic, at least understandable. Like I
Yeah.
understand where his anger comes from, and I understand what he's trying to do. And Robert always said, it's like The Walking Dead is really about choices. Like if you're in the apocalypse, if it's all about survival, are you going to become a fascist? Are you going to
Mhm.
become, nasty just in the with the excuse that you're doing it to protect your people. That was kind of the stance of the governor is I'm doing this to protect my people, you know.
Yeah. It was I actually thought with the show, because obviously the character is different in the comic, but I thought in the show it was such a shame that they never thought to put the governor and Carol together, because she's the complete like opposing counterpart to him, because she also suffers the loss of a child, and it
Yeah,
turns her into, I'm the mother of the group, the protector of the group, and she doesn't like killing people, but
that's
she's
really
really good at it.
perceptive. That's very astute. I agree. I mean, he came he I'm drawing a blank. He came close to a different character.
Andrea.
Andrea, yeah,
Yeah.
Andrea. Um, and I love her character. And but there was a moment where I and all the fans, practically not all the fans, but I and a lot of other people thought, why didn't she just shoot him? She had the chance. She's standing over him, he can't see her, and she's got a loaded gun. And but the more I thought about it, the more I thought it's pure Robert Kirkman. It's like
Mhm.
there's you know all these subtle counter currents of emotions, and she couldn't do it.
Mhm.
And so, you know, the like we I think you and I have been talking about, or at least circling around, um, the first 4 or 5 seasons are just a masterpiece.
They're
For
incredible.
Yeah. And Darabont, Frank Darabont brought in his um sort of traveling troupe of movie actors,
Jeffrey
Andrea
D. Munn.
included,
Yeah.
Jeffrey Munn. And he brought them in and they fit perfectly into Robert's world. It was just a
Yeah.
marriage made in heaven. It was unbelievable. And the appearance of Daryl Dixon, that was just kind of a surprise. But that's the thing about Darabont. He was a filmmaker, he was a movie maker.
Mhm.
And he's like, there's something, this kid has something. We got to build up that character. We got to do something with it.
Yeah. Then becomes the most popular character in the
Yeah,
whole show, and he wasn't even
exactly.
originally there. Yeah.
Right.
Darabont is one of like the kings of adapting work for me, because he's done all the most well received Stephen King adaptations as well.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
always said I did like the show after Darabont left, but the first 2, 3 seasons for me were my favorites. But I do think it
Me
was
too.
still good. But I always said, imagine getting rid of the guy before the prison season who did the Shawshank Redemption and the Green Mile.
Right.
It's like, are they crazy? If you're
Right.
doing prisons now.
Yeah, and also you're so right. And Darabont, one of his preternatural gifts is casting.
Yes, yeah.
You know, Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. Would that be the same movie
No,
without them? That,
no,
that was genius casting, you
he's
know.
he's incredible. This is an unpopular opinion, but my favorite character from the show in the first few seasons was Dale, and
Yeah, I agree.
I wrote my dissertation for my BA degree about The Walking Dead and Dale and T-Dog, um, and how they seem like sort of side characters, but actually all the decisions they make have massive impacts on like the major storylines and
Right.
characters. And I just remember submitting that and thinking, I can't believe I just got away with writing my dissertation for my degree about The Walking Dead. Like, because my research was just watching The Walking Dead over and over and like getting into the scripts and everything. But I had a great tutor that is a huge horror fan, Walking Dead
Yeah,
fan. So
right.
it was a
Yeah,
lot of fun.
Jeffrey in Irony, they were kind of the moral backbone of those early seasons.
What I
They
said.
Is that what you said? Yeah,
Yeah,
in your dissertation. Yeah, yeah, that's the
yeah,
central. You're spot on. I think because Dale was always like, "That's not right. That's not right. We
yeah.
shouldn't do that. We shouldn't do that. It's not right." He had this moral code that went into the apocalypse with him,
Mhm.
and I always tell people, because people ask, a lot of the people that work for Skybound during the Walking Dead's height, and they would go, "How
Mhm.
would you do in the apocalypse, Jay? How do you think you would do?" And I'm like, I would die within 15 minutes. I would be zombie food with, but I said I would if I could get a hold of a camper, a Winnebago, like
Yeah.
like I thought Dale was the smartest of the
Yeah.
group because of his camper.
Yeah, and teaching other people how to fix it and stuff, just in
Yeah,
case.
right.
Yeah, I thought that T-Dog was like criminally underused because
Yeah.
people. I remember being devastated the episode he died, and I was texting my friend, and she was just laughing at. She was like, "How can you be crying over?" And I was like, I just don't think we're watching the same show. And I met him at Walker Stalker, and once again, what a wonderful person. And I
Yeah,
told him
right.
about my dissertation, and he was like, "That is so cool." That he was there were loads of kids lining up to talk to him. I noticed, and he didn't even want to take his lunch break. They forced him to just go behind his little screen and eat a sandwich
Right.
quickly and come. And I
Yeah.
thought, oh, bless him. And every kid he talked to, he was like, "Are you working hard in school? Stay in school." And I was just like, "Oh, what a
Yeah,
like,
he's terrific. I mean, he's
yeah,
become a really close friend as well. I mean, I've made such wonderful friends over the years working for that. Um, what is it? I guess it's like Star Wars. It's a phenomenon. It's not
yeah,
just a TV show. It's a constellation. And also, I don't know if anybody has had so many mediums that were huge blockbuster hits.
yeah." The games as
Same.
well.
The games,
Yeah,
Tell- Telltale, remember Telltale games? I worked on one of those.
did you? I
Um,
didn't know that.
yeah, one day, Robert Kirkman, I was at his office. I was at Skybound in LA just working on something else. And he comes in and he goes, uh, I can't do it now, but this afternoon, can I have a few minutes with you? And I'm like, no, of course. He goes, okay, like 3 o'clock, 3 o'clock, come back to my office. Um, uh, and then he goes, uh, it's a surprise, but you're gonna get what you want.
Mhm.
He said that to me, and I'm like, what did he just say? You know, and the person I was with is, I think he said, you're gonna get what you want. Is he gonna kill you? I'm like, I don't know, but I can't wait to find out what this. And long story short, he goes, I know your favorite character is Michonne. I'm gonna have you work on the next Telltale game, which is called Michonne.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, it must be so surreal but really cool to get in on the ground floor of a
Yeah,
franchise that so many people come to love and respond to, and then become a fan of the other iterations of
right.
things going on. I just like I can't imagine. I just can't imagine getting to be. The Walking Dead was like my ultimate thing. I was like, it's still going in spin-offs and stuff. So maybe I'll get there.
Right. Yeah, we'll get
um,
there. Yeah,
um, I
absolutely.
I think it might go on literally forever because there's no
Yeah,
shortage of
right,
stories
right,
that you can tell for that universe.
right. Yeah, like now, our present, our the era we live in, it's never been like this before. When there's a giant hit, there's all this vertical integration. There's all these things that spring out of it, and all these platforms and venues and streaming services and games
Mhm.
and online, offline, all these, so something like The Walking Dead can kind of live in perpetuity in our culture in some form. It
Yeah.
might, I mean, like I all, full disclosure, when I first heard about it, and I had this opportunity facing me, and I might be able to get a job working on some corner of it. I thought, how could this possibly work? A zombie apocalypse.
Mhm.
It's been done to death. No, 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 no pun intended. And
Yeah.
it's almost like the cycle of it is just, lampooning humor, just making like satires of it, and and who knew that there was this version of the zombie mythos that would be so moving and important and would move people. So I knew when I first started reading the comic book and the first issue, um, the sheriff wakes up and he's dead set on getting home. And while he's on a horse, he finds a horse and he's
Mm.
riding a horse trying to get back to his home. And he's thinking about the birth of his only child, and it was a troubled birth. And he's thinking about his wife who could have died in childbirth. This is a comic book,
Yeah,
but
it's
it was a beautiful story. It was like it was written by Edward Albee or something. It was really rich
mhm.
from the first issue of the comic, and I just started going, there's something here, man. This is really powerful and beautifully written, and you know,
I
yeah,
yeah, I think the horror genre, it's weird. I don't know if this is as bad in the States it is as it is here, but there's this weird snobbery around horror here where it's regarded as like the lower art
yeah,
form or something.
absolutely,
And I am always talking to death about the fact that I personally think that it elicits the most empathy and understanding about other people because they're typically stories about people who are struggling through something and usually overcoming the thing. They're not
right,
all doom and gloom stories. And also, I think that it's the most feminist genre in regard to great female characters. And I know people always say, "Oh, horror's really sexist," but I just don't I just don't agree because whenever someone's like, "Oh
right,
no, there are great women in film," the ones they always think of are people like Ripley and Vasquez, Sarah Connor, like people who come from the horror genre.
right,
And I think that I think maybe the fandom was so intense with The Walking Dead because the comics you got stories about little kids and how they'd be psychologically affected
right,
growing up in this kind of environment. And I was always a defender of Laurie because I know everyone went off about, oh, she moved on to Shane really fast, but I was like, she is a woman with a small child and she thinks
right,
her husband is dead
yeah,
and she's
right,
already friends with this guy.
right, yeah,
This felt normal. Like I thought,
yeah,
well, of course, of
yeah,
course, that would naturally happen. I like,
right,
she's got a kid to think about. She needs protection, but also this is the only other person that she knows alive. So
right,
yeah, that was an unpopular opinion, but I was like, I think she gets too much hate for
yeah,
that
I agree,
decision.
I
Um,
agree.
because what would you do with I one of my favorite games is what would you do in the zombie apocalypse? And to that end, I actually do have a question for you, Jay, that I've
Sure.
started throwing into all of my author interviews now. So you're in the zombie apocalypse, and you can pick two of the following four people to form your survival team, and the other
Okay.
two are probably going to work against you.
All
So
right.
here are your options: Winnie the Pooh, R2D2, Mrs. Carmody from The Mist, and who should I throw in as a? Oh, we'll go Burke from Alien.
Okay, well, Burke is out
Yeah,
right off the bat.
you
He's the
can't trust him.
sloppiest piece of shit I've ever seen. That Paul Reiser uh, played Burke, and he's a terrific comic actor, but he really brought it for that role. I thought he was
Yeah,
amazing at that. It's funny because I was gonna say R2D2 and Winnie the Pooh, um, because I don't trust the other two characters. A
yeah,
and B, um, you know, like R2D2 kind of was the hidden, the secret weapon um, of Luke Skywalker. He kind of,
yeah.
he sort of was at the core of every, escape and, triumph and victory and everything. So he'd be the muscle, and then Winnie the Pooh would be the nurturer and help us find honey and
Plod around in his little t-shirt,
right.
making
And
everything
it
cute.
just no matter how grim it got, he'd be just sort of loving life because he can't,
Because
you
he's
know.
Winnie the Pooh.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
That's good. That's a good question. A good quiz.
well, I like to throw in the zombie apocalypse team question to everyone that I can, but I usually give people different options about who they can pick. But
Good.
I asked Tim Leben that question, and he said he
Great
would pick.
writer. I love Tim Levin. Yeah.
You know him?
I don't really know. I know. I'm a fan of his.
Yeah,
I read
I
his
think
work. Yeah.
almost everybody that I've ever spoken to, no matter where in the world they live, either knows of or personally knows Tim. It's so funny. I think
That's
he's like a
awesome.
Stephen King character, just
Right.
inhabiting all the worlds. Um,
Right.
he
He's like
said that
Zelig.
yeah, he said that he would pick Burke for his team so that he could use him as zombie fodder if he got in a jam. So um I I could talk to you all day,
Aw,
but
thank
the
you.
time is it's gone so fast. If I could round off with if there's anyone who's completely new to you, where would you recommend they start with your work if they're going to pick something up?
Oh, great question. Thank you for asking that. Probably, well, this isn't a plug. I mean, I'm serious.
No, go ahead and plug whatever.
Probably this book. This is the latest iteration of it. It's the tie-in for the movie,
Mhm,
and Dave Bautista is on the cover. He plays the hitman. This I wrote this in 1995,
mhm,
30 years ago. And it's been in development that long as a movie. It just came out last year. We had,
mhm.
it's been, my cash cow. It's been my thing I'm most proud of. It's an action thriller. It's not horror.
Mhm.
And it's funny. It's more like a Tarantino kind of story. But it just refused to die. They would have these big time actors, Bruce Willis, Michael Douglas, they would sign on and then they would fall out. They had these great directors. They had John Woo, and he would sign on and then he would fall out. And people go, God, that must have been horrible. And I'm like, no, it was fantastic because they had to keep paying me.
Oh yeah, and so many people who are so respected in their professions taking such an interest as well.
Yeah,
And what wanted to work
right.
on it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really cool. Yeah, I haven't quite worked my way through the whole back catalogue of your work yet, but um I yeah, outside of Walking Dead stuff, because I know we've talked a lot about that, but I my personal recommendation is self-storage because it's my
Oh,
favorite. I
thank
think
you.
it's
Thank you. That's really sweet. I appreciate that. That's
I
my most personal book. I mean,
oh, is it okay?
I
Um
mean, I was asked by the artist who did the artwork for it. He goes, I'm going to ask you this, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but were you in rehab? Were you, an addict?
hmm.
And I took that as the ultimate compliment.
Yes, that's
You know,
yeah.
I don't even remember if I told him or not, but the point and the reason I bring it up is that is something you were alluding to, that it seemed had verisimilitude when it came to addiction and stuff. And that's the ultimate compliment for me. I that's what I set out to do.
Yeah, I found it very very sympathetic, and to me it's a more realistic portrayal of what like an everyday drug addict. But you know what I mean, like
Right. Yeah, no,
someone who's
it is an
yeah,
everyday. It is an everyday drug addict. That's
yeah.
you
Um,
know,
but I think that
it sounds
you're
like a song. Everyday drug addict.
your average
It's,
everyday drug addict.
right,
Um,
it's the flip side to Sly and the Family Stones, everyday
yeah.
people.
Yeah, not everybody is like a train spotting character. That's the takeaway. Um, yeah,
Right.
I think that your characters are so authentic and well formed and really easy to
You.
connect to, even if you don't identify with their personal struggle. And that's my favorite thing about your writing, and what really that's as well as I think that if I'd discovered you a different way, not through The Walking Dead, I would still feel this way about your stories. And I'm really glad that my obsession with that franchise led me to your work, because I found you sooner than I might have, I think.
You too, Kaylee, I appreciate it. Yeah, I'll give you your money after we're done, after we
Oh,
finish.
yeah, pay up, Jay. Um, no, so
What people don't know is we're related. You're my cousin.
yeah, just distantly across the pond there. Oh, I wish that would be such a great family tree. Um, So for anyone watching or listening, I will put your information, Jay, in the description so that people
Cool.
can find your
Thank
work,
you.
your website, and everything. And just yeah, a little brief what we've covered in this conversation. And I just want to really sincerely thank you again for doing this, because you've just been one of my favorite authors for such
Oh,
a long
thank
time, and it's I can't overstate how privileged I feel to get to actually speak to you about your work, and dig down into my favorite parts of your stories a little bit more. So I really really appreciate your time and your willingness to be here.
Oh, it was a pure pleasure. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. Okay, so you heard it here, guys. Check the description for the books we mentioned, Jay's website and information. And if you haven't read any of Jay's work, like correct that immediately. And
Thank you.
sorry, and our unusual weird little sign off, Jay, because we are goats here at Happy Goat Horror, is bleat.